Old man was removed from the plane for having no shoes. The pilot said he'd known him. Once, they pulled him out of seat 31C at 7:09 in the morning, 4 minutes before boarding was supposed to close. He did not argue. He did not grip the armrest, or raise his voice, or look around the cabin for someone to witness what was happening. He simply placed his hands on his knees, pushed himself to his feet, the slow way that men pushed themselves to their feet when their joints have been carrying them for 71 years, walked up the aisle in front of the gate agent, with his head neither bowed nor lifted, just level. The way a man carries his head when he has decided that the opinion of the person behind him does not alter his posture. Feet were bare inside a pair of gray airport socks. The left one had a small hole at the heel that he had not yet had repaired. Shoes, brown leather worn to softness at the toe, with the kind of crease across the front that only comes from decades of the same foot, bending inside the same leather, were in the overhead bin above seat 31C in a plastic bag, because his feet had swollen on the bus from Kumasi, and he had removed them somewhere over Accra, and had not thought, when he boarded, that the socks and the shoes in the bag would become a problem. He had flown 17 times in his life. This had never been a problem before. It became a problem because of one man, and that man's name was printed on a badge clipped to his lapel. Bright. Gate Agent Bright. Age approximately 28. Shoulder width approximately average. Expression approximately the same one worn by every person who has ever had a small rule to enforce and has decided the enforcement is the most important moment of their day. Gate Agent Bright said something to the old man as they reached the jetway entrance. The old man did not respond. He stopped walking and turned and looked at Bright for a moment. The way you look at a thing that is exactly what you expected it to be. Then he turned back and walked through the door into the airport. He did not know that the cockpit door was standing open. He did not know that the pilot, doing his final walkthrough of the instrument panel before pushback, had looked up at the sound of voices in the cabin and seen, through the narrow rectangle of the cockpit door, the back of a man in a gray linen shirt being led out of seat 31C by a gate agent. He did not know that the pilot had gone very still. He had looked at the gray shirt, then at the particular angle of the man's shoulders, then at the left hand gripping the headrest of seat 32A as the man straightened up, that something had moved through him the way cold water moves through a room. Sudden, total, irreversible. He did not know any of that. His name was Emmanuel Tobena Achebe. He went by Tobena, except to his wife, who had called him Manu for 38 years, and who was the only one that's ever been permitted to do so. He was 71 years old, 5 feet 9, and had weighed 63 kilograms since approximately 1998, a fact he knew because his wife had written it on his medical form every year without asking, and every year it had still been accurate. He was thin in the way that men are thin who have always been thin, not from deprivation but from constitution, a leanness in the face that made him look, in certain lights, younger than he was, and in other lights, precisely as old as every year of him. He walked with a slight lean to the left that was not a limp, but had the effect of one, from a fall off a construction scaffold in 1991 that had broken 2 ribs and healed imperfectly. His shirt was gray linen, washed and pressed, 2 buttons at the collar that he left open. It had belonged to his father before him. His trousers were dark green cotton, slightly loose at the waist in a way he had compensated for with a belt that had been resoled twice. The socks, gray, airport bought 3 years ago, 4 pairs for 12 Ghana cedis, were the only concession to practicality in the outfit. Brown shoes, the ones in the bag in the overhead bin of the plane he was no longer on, were the shoes he had worn at his wife's funeral 9 months ago. He wore them on significant occasions. He had been wearing them to fly to Lagos, where his son lived, where his son had asked him to come because the son had not been doing well since the funeral either, and where Tobena had decided, on the bus from Kumasi with his feet swelling quietly against the leather, that he would finally go. The leather pouch he carried was not a pouch but a flat canvas case, olive green, military style, with a brass zip across the top that had been replaced once. Inside it were his identification card, his boarding pass, still clutched in his hand as gate agent Bright walked him out. A photograph of his wife taken in 1987 standing outside there. House in Kumasi with her arms folded, and her face turned slightly toward the sun, and a small folded piece of paper on which she had written, her handwriting, the address of their son's apartment in Lagos. She had written it for him before she got sick. He had never memorized it. He had never needed to, because she had always known it. He was flying to an address she had written on a piece of paper he kept against a photograph of her face. He sat in the departure lounge of Terminal 2 at Kotoka International Airport in Accra, Ghana, at 7:14 in the morning. The lounge smelled of floor cleaner and the particular stale warm smell of recirculated airport air that is the same in every terminal in every city, in the world regardless of what country surrounds it. A family with 2 children near the window, the children eating biscuits from a shared packet. A young woman with headphones and a laptop. A man in a business suit reading a newspaper with the practiced disinterest of someone who reads newspapers on planes and in lounges the way other people breathe. A cleaner moving a mop in long arcs across the far end of the terminal. Nobody was looking at Tobena. He opened the canvas case and took out the boarding pass and looked at it. Flight KQ 547. Departure 0720. Gate 11. Seat 31C. The boarding pass did not say anything about shoes. He looked at his feet. Gray airport socks, hole at the left heel. He put the boarding pass back in the case and zipped it shut and folded his hands on top of it and looked at the gate. The gate was not active. The jetway door was closed. The desk was empty. 7:17, 3 minutes to departure. His son had confirmed the flight the night before by text. Baba, call when you land. I will be at arrivals. And the phone was somewhere at the bottom of his travel bag, which was in the hold of the aircraft, because he had checked it. Because he had not expected to need the phone before he landed. He had the address in the canvas case. He had enough money for a taxi in a fold of notes in his trouser pocket. He had the photograph of his wife and the boarding pass for a flight that was now 3 minutes from closing. He had his son at the other end of a city he had not been to in 9 months. He did not look at the clock again after 7:17. There was nothing useful a clock could tell him at this point that he did not already know. A second gate agent, a woman, not Bright, older, with a Lagos Airways lanyard around her neck that she had not switched out for the Kenya Airways one, walked past the gate and glanced at Tobena on the bench. She slowed for a moment. Something in her expression shifted slightly, the way a person's expression shifts when they register an incongruity. An old man in pressed clothes, sitting alone with his hands folded outside a gate that was supposed to be closed by now. She did not stop. She kept walking. If she had stopped and asked what had happened, or had gone to the gate desk and made one call, the next 6 minutes would have resolved themselves through a different route. She walked past. That is the nature of the terminals through which we all pass, full of people who almost stopped. Across the terminal, a corridor that connected the departure gates to the airline operations offices. A man in a pilot's uniform was walking at a pace that was not quite running, but that had the quality of running. Purposeful, directional, slightly faster than the situation of walking ordinarily required. Captain Dubum Nwosu was 44 years old, the senior first officer of Kenya Airways, Flight KQ 547, who had been upgraded to captain 6 months ago following the retirement of his predecessor. He had 3 minutes before the cabin door was supposed to close, and the jetway was supposed to retract, and the ground crew was supposed to signal pushback. He was using those 3 minutes to walk from the cockpit to the departure lounge, through a door that required his crew ID badge and his own deliberate decision to leave the aircraft, which was not something captains did after boarding close. The operations supervisor, a woman named Constance, who had worked the Accra hub for 11 years, and who had seen a great many things she had not expected to see, watched him come through the door and said his name. He did not stop. He said over his shoulder that he would be 3 minutes. She said they were at boarding close. He said he knew. He kept walking. He found Tobena in the departure lounge at 7:16, sitting with his hands folded on top of the canvas case, looking at the gate. He stood in front of him for a moment before he said anything. He was breathing slightly faster than normal. He had the look of a man who has run a calculations in his head and is still running it even while doing other things. "Sir," he said, "are you the man from seat 31C? Tobena looked up. He looked at the uniform. He looked at the face above the uniform. He said nothing. "I need you to stand up," the captain said, "and come with me." "I have no shoes," Tobena said. "I know. Come anyway." Tobena looked at him for another moment. Then he placed his hands on his knees, pushed himself to his feet the slow way, tucked the canvas case under his arm, and followed the captain back through the operations door. They did not speak in the corridor. Constance watched them pass. She picked up her radio. At the jetway door, the captain stopped and turned. He looked at Tobena directly, at his face, with the concentration of a man trying to confirm something he has already confirmed. Then he said, "You taught engineering at Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. From 1983 to 2009. You taught structural design to second-year students in the engineering faculty." Tobena looked at him. "I did. My name is Dubem Nwosu. I was in your second-year class in 1999. He paused. "You failed me in July, and then you passed me in September. If this story is sitting in your chest the way I think it is, stay with me. Because what Tobena said when he heard that, what had happened between the failing and the passing, is what this whole story has been moving toward." Tobena did not speak immediately. He looked at the captain's face the way you look at something you have known in one form and are being asked to recognize in another. Then something shifted in his eyes, not surprise, something older than surprise. "Nwosu," he said. The word came out quietly, almost to himself. "The boy from Anambra." "Yes, sir. You drew aircraft in the margins of your structural design notes." "Every page," the captain said, "told you that you were in the wrong faculty. You told me that 3 times. Tobena looked at the boarding pass in his hand, then at his feet, back at the captain's face. "You told the gate agent to remove me." "I didn't tell anyone anything. I was in the cockpit." He paused. "Telling you now. Put your shoes on. We are going to be late." The shoes were still in the overhead bin in a plastic bag above seat 31C. A flight attendant named Adwoa had, at the captain's request, relayed through Constance via radio, retrieved them from the bin, and brought them to the jetway door. She handed them to Tobena with both hands. He sat down on the metal bench at the side of the jetway, the one that is there for exactly the moments when a passenger needs to sit. He unlaced the brown shoes and pulled them on over the gray socks slowly, one at a time, and tied them. His hands were steady. His face did not change. When he stood up, he was wearing the shoes he had worn at his wife's funeral. Tied on a jetway in Accra, the pilot who had once drawn aircraft in the margins of his structural design notes was standing 2 meters away, waiting. Gate Agent Bright was not at the gate when they passed through it. He was at the operations desk, signing a form. He looked up as they came through and saw the captain and the old man in the gray linen shirt, and did not say anything. Constance, standing to Bright's left with her radio in one hand, looked at Bright and then at the form he was signing and said, quietly, she would need a copy of his incident report before end of shift. Bright said yes. She said she would also need to have a conversation with him about passenger assessment protocol before he was next rostered for boarding close. Bright said he understood. She said she was glad he did. She handed him a pen. On the aircraft, Tobena was in seat 31C again. His shoes were on. Canvas case was in his lap with both hands on top of it. He did not look at the other passengers. He looked out the window at the tarmac and the equipment vehicles moving in the early morning light. The captain's voice came through the cabin speakers at 7:31. It was a standard departure announcement. Weather in Lagos. Estimated flight time 1 hour 40 minutes. Cruising altitude 34,000 feet. Thank you for choosing Kenya Airways. Then a pause that was perhaps 1 second longer than standard announcements usually contain. And then, we are pleased to have everyone on board this morning. Everyone. Nothing more than that. 2 words. But the flight attendant named Adwoa, standing at the front of the cabin, heard the weight in them and glanced toward the rear of the aircraft, where an old man in a gray linen shirt had. His eyes closed against the headrest with his hands folded over a canvas case and his brown shoes on his feet, and was breathing steadily. The way people breathe when something has gone right, and the body needs a moment to believe it. What Gate Agent Bright had seen at Gate 11 that morning was a man with no shoes on a plane. What he had identified was a problem to be corrected by policy. What he had not seen could not have been expected to see, given that he was looking at socks and not at the whole man above the socks, was 26 years of a classroom, 41 graduating cohorts, hundreds of structural engineers, bridge builders, water system designers, one pilot who had spent 2 years in the wrong faculty drawing aircraft in every margin available to him before Emmanuel Tabena Achebe had, called him to his office after the September examination results and sat across from him and said, without preamble, "The grade is a pass. What I want to know is why you are still here," Dubem had told him. It took 11 minutes. He had told him about the scholarship that only existed for engineering, and his father, who had taken a loan to help him get it, the aircraft that had been in his head since he was 8 years old watching a plane clear the trees above his uncle's compound in Ninoe. How that sound! The engines reaching full power at the moment of rotation had stayed in him for 20 years, like a note played once in a room, with good acoustics. He had told him about the drawings. He had told him about the teacher in secondary school who had told him that aviation was not a career for people from Anambra. He had told all of this to a man he had failed an examination for, sitting in an office with textbooks on every wall and a single window that faced the faculty courtyard, and the smell of chalk in the air, 4:10 on a September afternoon in 1999. Tabena had listened without speaking. He had not taken notes. He had not shifted in his chair. He had looked at Dubem the way engineers look at structural problems, with full attention and without early conclusion. When Dubem finished, the room was quiet for long enough that Dubem had time to regret having said as much as he had said. Then Tabena said, "Go to the Faculty of Engineering and ask for the transfer form. Tell them I sent you. The scholarship follows the student, not the department. I checked this morning." Dubem had not known he checked. He had not known there was anything to check. He had gone to the office that day, expecting to collect his grade and leave. He had not known that Tabena, reading his examination paper in July, seen the drawings in the upper margin of page 3. 2 small aircraft, precise, with the correct sweep to the wing, drawn by someone who understood the geometry of lift, and had written transfer form in his own notebook that evening, and had asked the administrative secretary the following morning about scholarship portability, and had received the answer before Dubem ever walked through the door. Tabena had stood up, which was the signal that the conversation was finished. Dubem had stood up. The door, Tabena had said one more thing. "The drawings in the margins are not a problem. They are the diagnosis. Pay attention to the diagnosis." Dubem had transferred to aerospace engineering that October. He had graduated in 2002 with a distinction. He had his commercial pilot license by 2007, his instrument rating by 2008, and his type rating for the Boeing 737 by 2011. He had been in uniform for 13 years when he looked through the cockpit door of Flight KQ-547 and saw the back of a gray linen shirt being removed from seat 31C. He had recognized the shirt before he recognized the man. Not because the shirt was distinctive, because the man who had worn it had always been exactly this. A person who moved through the world at his own pace, whose posture did not change when someone was watching, who pressed himself to his feet from a chair the same way every time, and carried his head level and arrived in a room as though the room had been expecting him. There are people who pass through your life briefly and leave almost nothing behind them, and there are people who pass through once and rearrange everything. The second kind are harder to name, because what they rearrange is internal and shows up later, years later, sometimes decades later. In the decisions you make that feel like your own decisions, in the directions you turn that feel like your own instincts, in the life you build that you call your own life, because by the time you are living it, you have forgotten how much of it was built on something someone else handed you in an office on a September afternoon. Tobena had handed Dubem a transfer form and a piece of information about a scholarship. That is all. That is everything. In Lagos, Tobena's son was waiting at the arrivals terminal with a handwritten sign that said Baba. Letters large enough to be read from 20 meters away, a gesture of welcome that Tobena found excessive and said so, and his son said he knew. They embraced in the arrivals hall, with the sign pressed between them, and stood there for longer than either of them would later admit. The flight KQ-547 manifest showed that the aircraft had departed Kotoka at 7:31, 11 minutes behind schedule. It landed at Murtala Muhammad International Airport in Lagos at 9:09. In the airline's system, the delay was logged as operational. The reason code was G, ground handling. Gate Agent Bright's incident report, submitted at the end of his shift, noted a policy enforcement action regarding passenger footwear compliance that had been subsequently reversed by the captain on grounds of passenger welfare. Constance's note attached to the report recommended a full review of discretionary removal procedures at the gate level, a mandatory passenger context training session for all boarding agents rostered at Terminal 2. Training was scheduled for the following month at the Kotoka International Airport Operations Training Center. The first session was held at Gate 11. Tobena never knew about the report. He never knew about the training. He did not need to. What he knew was that his shoes had been on his feet when the plane left the ground, that the address his wife had written was in his canvas case, that his son had made a sign. There are people the world removes from rooms before it has finished with them. It removes them because it is looking at one thing: the socks, the plastic bag, the absence of the expected credential, and cannot see the other thing, which is the whole life surrounding the one visible gap. The world is very good at seeing gaps. It is less practiced at seeing what fills the space around them. A gate agent sees a rule and a violation. He does not see a classroom in Kumasi running for 26 years. He does not see a transfer form and a scholarship clause and a boy from Anambra who finally had permission to go where he had always been going. He does not see all the aircraft that came after, because one man in an office looked at the drawings in the margins and called them a diagnosis. You cannot reduce a person to the one thing that is missing. At the moment you are looking at them, the shoes are in the bag. They are still his shoes. He is still the man who wore them at his wife's funeral and who will wear them again today, and who has been wearing them, in one sense, for every step of the last 38 years. The bag does not change the man. The rule does not change what the man built. And the world's inability to see the whole person does not make the whole person smaller. It only makes the world smaller, narrowed down to a badge and a policy and a socks check at boarding close while the rest of the person waits. It's folded, head level, for someone who has better eyes. If someone removed you from a room today based on the one visible thing that was missing, would anyone in that building know your whole story? And if they didn't, whose responsibility is that? Leave your answer in the comments. I really want to read it. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, people the world overlooks until they change everything. I'll see you in the next one.